I'm Sara Martinez. I'm a teacher at Prolex Universidad. It's great to be here with you. I will try to summarize the most important findings of an investigation carried out at Prolex Universidad. Last year, I set out to discover the most important factors that affect performance when using hypotheticals and counterfactual conditionals in verbal communication. In an interview conducted to students, they were encouraged to use these linguistic forms in their answers. And what I found is that even though the students had been taught these grammatical constructions before, most of them had trouble integrating these sentences in their discourse. Who has not seen students struggle to use hypothetical and counterfactual conditionals in spoken language? I can start by saying that in my experience as an English teacher, I have noticed that when I teach conditional types 2 and 3, the students show difficulty in understanding the grammatical aspects of these assumptions, so that the structure, meaning, and use turn out to be puzzling. Consequently, when it comes to integrating these grammatical constructions into speech, the result is often not as desired. But what is the real challenge to using complex grammatical structures like hypotheticals and counterfactuals in spoken language? There are many factors that can contribute to a weak integration of these forms in speech. However, I will focus on those aspects that gave rise to the premises in which my research was based. For example, I have noticed that among some factors that can be pointed out as possible causes of the limited use of these forms are, on the one hand, the linguistic and cognitive complexity, and on the other hand, the little time devoted to oral practice and production of these clauses. In addressing the subject of linguistic and cognitive complexity, I found that many students feel doubtful and unconfident when trying to use these forms in speech in such a way that they avoid using them, and if they do, it is quite common that they commit different types of errors, such as omissions, additions, misorderings, etc. To understand the complexity of these structures, we must resort to the approach of Larsen-Freeman. Larsen-Freeman argued that grammatical structures not only have morphosyntactic form, but are also used to express meaning and in context appropriate use. Then, if we analyze the form, meaning, and use of hypothetical and counterfactual conditionals, we find that these complex forms have a polysemic nature that creates confusion. In addition, unreal conditionals have a syntactic structure that is made up of complex grammatical elements. For instance, conditional sentences contain two clauses, the conditional or if clause and the result or main clause. The conditional type 2 is formed by the verb in past in the condition, and auxiliary would, could, or might, plus the base form in the result. Conditional type 3, on the other hand, is formed by a past perfect form in the condition, and auxiliary would, could, or might, plus auxiliary have, and the past participle form in the result clause. Another important feature is that the result clause and the if clause are interchangeable in position. And students have to know that when an if clause comes at the beginning, it is usually separated from the rest of the sentence by a comma. In both conditionals, the result is highly dependent on the fulfillment of the condition. Another complication comes from the time-tense relationship expressing hypothetical and counterfactual conditionals, since the verb form used in both the condition and result clauses conveys a subjunctive meaning. The semantic complexity of these forms also lies in the many possible meanings that coexist within the same syntactic structure. For instance, hypothetical conditionals enable speakers to convey the idea of an unreal, imaginary, or even impossible situation. For instance, if I were you, I wouldn't quit school. Counterfactuals, on the other hand, convey the idea of antagonism with reality. You could feel better if you exercise regularly. In other words, counterfactuals express an idea that contrasts with reality. Hence, the person performing the illocutionary act has to activate the mental representation of real and unreal events that exist in parallel. Counterfactuals then lead speakers to think of different representations and make different inferences than in hypothetical conditionals. This increases the need for a broader mental imagery in which both the real and the fictional coexist as part of the same event. This is the mental representation that students have to go through to interpret the meaning of counterfactual events. We have a contrary to the fact or unreal situation. For example, if it hadn't rained, I would have gone to the park. This contrasts with the factual or real situation, but it rained and I stayed home. In addition, students need to know when it is advantageous to use these forms. For example, hypotheticals and counterfactuals have long been used in science, where conjectures lead to theories. Similarly, these structures can be used in criminal trials or in circumstances where we want to express wishes, regrets, or sad feelings about the past. They are also used to give advice and express how we would have acted differently if we had had more information. As can be seen, conditionals can fulfill a variety of functions in speech. And it is in this myriad of uses that their complexity also lies. So, knowing this complexity, should we expect that our students integrate these structures into fluent speech right after they are taught? Well, science says that learners have to process this information to get hold of the principal aspects of hypotheticals and counterfactuals, such as form, meaning, and use, to later store the information in the long-term memory, where it will be available for further use. This criterion relies on cognitive theories, more specifically on information processing approaches, that attempt to explain how students process linguistic information and how their ability to process the second language develops over time. Some theorists, like Anderson and McLaughlin, believe that new second language information is processed in the form of declarative knowledge or explicit knowledge, which is similar to knowing that or knowing the rules of use, and then restructured and automated as implicit or knowing how to use it. However, this can only happen through extended practice and repeated activation. In language learning, declarative knowledge is comparable to being able to perform hypotheticals and counterfactuals in a monitored situation in the classroom, where the focus is on form, while implicit or procedural knowledge enables students to perform these utterances where there is full focus on message, as in ordinary exchange of information, ideas, or feelings, or in remote communication via telephone. Thus, information processing theories enlighten us with the notion of how students must go through a process of restructuring and reorganizing various elements, such as form, meaning, and use, before they can consolidate this use into fluent speech. It is in these processes that the sequence can be disrupted by factors like cognitive and linguistic complexity. To better understand the mental process that occur in our minds when we learn new information, we will examine the following infographic. Science says that new information comes through our senses and it is held in the short-term memory or working memory, where the important information is selected and then moved to the long-term memory. However, the short-term memory is quite short and limited, lasting just 20 to 30 seconds and capable of only holding between 5 and 9 items, while the long-term memory is much more stable and durable. Therefore, to effectively transfer new information to long-term memory, the role of attention is paramount. Attention plays a part in the selection of information that we believe is important. Nevertheless, if the structure is too complex, the information will not be encoded correctly and it will be lost. This is why it is of great importance to encourage students to build conscious learning about these linguistic forms. By helping students focus their attention on input and noticing the most important features of hypotheticals and counterfactuals, we will be helping them to speed up the learning process and eventually use these forms naturally in speech. So, some approaches we can try to use to facilitate the students' understanding and learning of these forms are through sensory stimulation. Students often depend on external stimuli to activate the mental representation of events. The use of memory aids in the form of visual and auditory stimuli can help students infer, understand, and remember information easily. For instance, visuals like pictures, timelines, PowerPoint presentations, charts, and gap fills can facilitate students' comprehension and encourage engagement. This is an example of a timeline that highlights how the unreal past refers to an event that did or did not happen in the past and how it affected the outcome. The objective of this activity is to help students visualize what is the temporal relationship of conditionals type 3. For instance, she wouldn't have been tired this morning if she had gone to bed earlier last night. But she didn't go to bed early last night, so she was tired this morning. This is another activity. Here we can also see a pictogram in which we remind students of the past and real form so that they can construct sentences that contain this structure. The two activities also convey a semantic meaning. For instance, in activity 1, students can become aware of the series of negative results as a consequence of a single event in the past. In activity 2, we are helping students understand the semantic relationship between the real and the suppositional. Other interactive activities like Kahoot can also help students activate prior knowledge about form, meaning, and use. Similarly, using other strategies like distributed practice can help students automate the information faster. Another effective approach is to resort to rote reading and recycle material. This compels students to assimilate and retain information that can easily be retrieved at will. For instance, distributed practice activates memory functions that make the integration of new information into speech. Hence, the role of practice is a major one. Every time we recycle the use of these structures in class, we help students reinforce prior knowledge and gain a deep understanding of the three prominent aspects of these constructions, such as syntax, semantics, and pragmatics. Eventually, by revisiting these grammatical forms, students will automate their use. Furthermore, to ease the automation of hypotheticals and counterfactuals, we can reduce the time available to perform a speaking activity. In certain circumstances, we can also speed up the cues the learners are given. By doing this, we encourage them to integrate these expressions in speech without having to think much of the grammatical aspects. In light of this, as much as possible, teachers must allocate time and design activities for students to practice and produce speeches that contain these forms. To conclude, the multi-component nature of communicative language, linked to the complexity of these forms, certainly makes it difficult for students to try to use them in speech. Therefore, we cannot expect our students to acquire the skill immediately. The information can be stored in the long-term memory in the form of declarative knowledge, but still students won't be able to use hypothetical and counterfactual forms naturally in the spoken word. On account of this, teachers must assure that the practice and production stages in class are sufficiently reinforced. By encouraging students to use these constructions periodically, we will be favoring the automation of these utterances. And at the same time, we will be facilitating their incorporation into fluent speech. Thank you very much.